sometimes the case that vendors are ahead of the game, right? Where they're actually using their own tools in some cases really well, right? And especially if they've got really strong operations people, really strong marketers internally, that they're able to make progress on account-based things sooner than sort of more traditional organizations. So that doesn't necessarily surprise me. I would say I've seen it, I've certainly seen it where they're ahead of the game. And I think the trick is getting other marketers who aren't, in vendors to appreciate, hey, this is how, yes, we used our own tool, but here's how we did it, right? And it's still a valid example. But that's kind of what stood out to me this week. But what I'd love to do is actually use this as an opportunity to introduce our special guest today. So excited to have our first guest on Account-Based Fridays. And that is Bruce Bryan, who is Chief Strategy Officer. I think I got your title correct. I hope I did. For
Yes.
Hive9, which is doing some really interesting work. And Bruce is a longtime former colleague of mine. And I've enjoyed, staying in touch, Bruce, and seeing your work. And something that stood out to me was this recent piece you did on attribution modeling. It's just fantastic and detailed and so useful. So we thought it'd be great to invite you today. But before we do that, we'd love to have you weigh in. What do you think about that poll? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to actually go in the opposite direction of Megan, and I think that some of those poll responses are likely overstated in that human nature says that if ABM doesn't exist at my company, but I've thought about it, I could at least say I'm dabbling. So I might go in that direction. And what I label as good progress might be, dabbling. I've barely touched it. And I want to appear like I'm making progress in this direction because I know I should be. And Megan, you and I have had a lot of conversations around account-based marketing and account-based selling. And I think that we used to be a lot better at it and we got way off track. And that we somehow got wrapped around the axle of individual selling. And in fact, it really is a practice that we used to, and we've had this conversation too. When was it that when leads in the Glenn Ross movie, when a lead was on an index card, it didn't mean that lead was that one person and that was it. That lead was for an account. It was, this account is probably looking for stuff we sell. Go chase them down. That meant go find all the people at that account that might be interested. Go develop an account plan and go make a sale happen at the account. That was all account-based. That was 20 years ago. And then somehow we got all wrapped around the axle of a lead as a person. And we got off track. And I think that if you have a philosophy of account-based selling, you simply need to align marketing to it. So if sales is really looking at when we get a lead, we need to expand and triangulate and go after that lead as it is as an account, then that mindset is going to pervade the organization, and you will go after sales with that nature in mind. And then marketing simply has to align to the way sales works and provide them with the intent, provide them with the outreach, provide them with the engagement to get those other people involved. That's my thoughts, is that this is maybe overstated and that there's work to be done. I would totally agree with you that the vendors are probably the ones that are doing pretty well in that regard.
Yeah, I think you raise a really important point, Bruce, and I think it's related to our topic today of attribution, right? Because where we got wrapped around the axle on leads being one person, we also got wrapped around the axle of attempting to make the process by which we find and engage that person and align them to an account and put them in a context and engage them in a nonlinear, complicated buying process. We tried to simplify that too much too, which led to, I think, some pretty big issues and problems with the way that marketing has attempted to claim credit. And I think those two things move together, right? Marketing being sort of forced in many ways, I think, to claim credit for a particular touch, in most cases, first or last, which drives me crazy, but that's how many systems were set up, right? Attached to a lead, a person, irrespective of the account, doesn't matter. It's just, this was the last thing that person did before we knew who they were. And therefore that thing gets credit for being the most valuable activity in our book. And I think that and the lead mindset have led to some unfortunate consequences 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, right? So I'm hoping, that maybe, and I'm going to keep an eye on chat too for folks who are on the line to see who has questions, but I would love to hear from you, Bruce, kind of what prompted you digging into all of the different ways that one could execute attribution and some of the things that you're seeing changing in the market about how companies are thinking of the way that marketing should do that, just to sort of give us an overview of your thinking.
So one of the things that I think differentiates the way we look at attribution and the way we think about it is I hate the idea of marketers thinking that they have to assign credit. It's not about assigning credit. It's about telling a story. There's absolutely nothing wrong with first touch attribution because it tells a specific story and it quantifies that story not by giving credit, but by telling you of all the revenue that you've got, these are the marketing activities that got that revenue launched. So it's not that they don't get credit for delivering that revenue. They get credit for being the types of activities that got people to engage. Last touch tells a different story. It tells you what people are engaging with at the very end of their buying cycle. So it tells a good story. Now, which one I want to drive my business on, you shouldn't drive it on either of them. You should have those two stories available to you, and you should probably then pick a couple of multi-touch models you should be running 3, 4, or 5 attribution models so that you can use them to tell the stories that you need to tell to justify the decisions that you're making. And if you want to really go down this road of it's got to be a credit scenario, then you really need to be thinking about a custom inference model with multiple touch points with some sort of a time decay that matches your time decay, that weights different interaction types appropriately, and also looks at the specific inflection points and gives some weighting to those. And most companies are light years away from being able to put the systemic pieces in place to do that, because you also, if you're going to do that and you want to give the credit properly, you also need to give credit for all the sales touches, because they need to become part of that attribution. And those sales touches need to all be accounted for. So you've got to have that built into your system. And if you don't have all of those touches built in, then you're just kind of making up the numbers. So use attribution for what it's good at doing. And that is telling you what works in certain situations. So if I'm looking at my first touch and I've got 25 different tactics that I'm putting to market, and 3 of them are doing all the work, meaning that's where all the engagement's coming from, then I've got some really valuable insight that can allow me to focus and bring clarity to that and reduce that footprint to the things that are really working. That's valuable to me. How much credit each one got in actually driving revenue isn't. So I look at attribution maybe a little bit differently than most.
I'd actually agree with you on the credit side. And you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? As a marketer or a practitioner, you have to have something that shows that you're accountable to your function. It's when you camp out on that attribution and pound your chest, hey, look what marketing did. That's where I think you run into risk. You run into a risk of multiple funnels, sales having one funnel, marketing having another funnel, but whose is right? And then the other risk that you introduce when you start doing that end zone celebration is, well, marketing might be showing really great attribution, but the top line's not growing or the bottom line's not growing. And then what? That's not a position you want to be in as a marketing leader, to be, doing that end zone celebration when the company's not growing. But it can tell, to your point, it can tell that story really, really well. I also look at attribution. Maybe I take it a notch higher. And I look at it from a route to market perspective, inbound, partners, and outbound, and see how each of those macro functions are performing at an account level, driving to the bottom line. Less about the attribution. Attribution's a piece of it, but it's not the focus. And I think, the focus originally with the lead model was, hey, look what marketing has done for me lately. So I think you just got to be really sensitive on how you position that internally.
I agree that it's not the whole, it's definitely not the whole story, and that's kind of where I go with the not giving it so much on the credit, but look at each element of attribution for the story that it does tell, and use that as being valuable. Because when you look at the influence side, and Megan, this comes back to conversations I had with Ross Graber, in that for most marketing organizations, you're influencing 100% of revenue. So if you use an attribution model that is looking at influence, and you're influencing 100% of revenue, and you're going to go sit in front of a sales organization and take credit for influencing all of their revenue, that makes it look like you did it all and they didn't do anything. You're gonna lose that seat at the table, because that's not in fact what happened, but that's what the math and the credit algorithms are going to show. So that's where we really have to be a little more self-aware of the story that we're trying to tell. What we're trying to tell is a story about what campaigns, what programs, what tactics are working, which ones are not, where we should be putting our investments, whether it's driving partner channels, whether it's driving influence efforts to SDRs, or whether it's sales enablement, pipeline acceleration efforts that are helping sales get things across the finish line. That's really what we want to see, is what impact we're having and where we should be moving the investment dollars. That's to me the value of attribution. It's not where a lot of people think that they need to be doing it for.
I think you're exactly right, Bruce. It's true that I believe it has been used as a credit claiming exercise. And I think in some cases, people's hands get forced to that too, right? Because the question going on high is, tell me the ROI of this thing that you did. Well, that's, and unfortunately, when the answer is, it depends or it's complicated, you get the eye roll, right? And I know why. That's fair. Like, you want a straight answer, but unfortunately, as buyers, we know ourselves, the answer isn't that straight. It's just not. And especially now that we've got sellers executing in effect their own marketing campaigns, because they're not doing the in-person visits, they're not doing some of the more traditionally salesy activities, or they're doing them via phone, right? So they're getting recorded in a different way. You have even more of an opportunity, I think, to shift that conversation to say, how do you get a clear picture of all of the touches that are taking place in a buying cycle? And then, exactly to your point, use them to tell a story about what happens when we win with the people that we want to sell to, and what happens when we lose from the people that we want to sell to, and what happens when things stall, and how do we use that then to inform and optimize our investment portfolio across sales and marketing. And I think that's the piece that nobody wants to hear, because it sounds complicated, but that's kind of where it's going. And I'd love for you to comment on also how that feeds planning too, because I think that's where it gets really critical.
So yeah, I mean, from a planning perspective, it's extremely valuable, because what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to stack rank the right down to the tactic level. You want to be able to stack rank what's working the best at each stage of the waterfall. So what's working the best in the middle stages in terms of moving opportunities along, what's working the best at the top, what's working the best at the bottom. You want to be able to do those stack rankings so that you can literally stop funding the things that are not working and redirect those dollars quickly into things that are. What we saw in 2020 with our customers who had the segmentation and the attribution properly set up was that as soon as COVID hit, I had customers that were able to redirect those marketing dollars, not only redirect them, but then earmark them all as COVID dollars, so that at the end of the year, they could not only tell you what they did with that money and how quickly they redirected it, but whether or not it worked. Because they had then what it got moved into was all marked. So now I know whether those new tactics that I engaged in, those digital one-on-one virtual events and things like that that are now cropping up everywhere. Those types of activities really got earmarked as part of that money, because guess what? You can't plan 2021 based on 2020. And because of how dramatically some things change permanently, you can't plan it based on 2019, and no one would ever think of going back to 2018 to plan it.
Yep.
So what are you going to look at in 2022 isn't going to be any better. We're not going to get to a consistent planning year until 2023. And I don't know that a lot of people have come to grips with that I can't just, you've got to plan based on what you learned and not based on what you did. And that's, I know I'm not supposed to do a sales pitch on here, but that is one of the tenets of what we do at Hive 9 is don't plan based on what you did. That's what a lot of people do. They take last year's plan, copy it to this year's plan, and tweak it. That's not going to work until maybe 2023. And that's a long ways off for marketers in this tenure of CMOs.
I'd be curious just to expand on that thought process. Didn't mean to interrupt you there, Bruce, but I'd be curious if anybody else has experience here. What are you experiencing in terms of your own budgets and your planning? Are you do you have an established budget where you're able to invest against, or is it a zero-based budget? And because to Bruce's point, there's been so much change that you're having to get approval on a lot more than in times past. What are you guys seeing in terms of trends there?
Yeah, someone want to be brave and jump in? We'd love to hear from you. I see Mark going off mute. That's a good sign. All right.
Start. I'm new to the company, so I'll just share kind of where it is coming in. But there is a lot of willingness to be flexible. So especially as we're dealing, I'm in a global role, so we're dealing with different countries opening up at different times, and we're real focused on sales targets in countries and doing whatever we need to. So it doesn't really matter whether we're spending money with an agency or a publication or an in-person event. We're going to keep doing virtual and digital marketing along the way, but we're definitely flexing every day as things change. An event is canceled, 1 week, and the next week someone says this thing's going from virtual to live in 3 months, so be ready with a booth. It's all kind of evolving very, very quickly this year.
I think that's interesting. And other folks, who's having a similar experience? Are you seeing greater flexibility, or is anyone seeing maybe greater scrutiny? I'm curious to know if anybody's in that camp.
Megan, we have seen a number of customers introduce, and it was the zero-based budgeting comment that made me think of this. I've got a number of customers now that even if zero-based budgeting is not their budget methodology, they are creating a segmentation of their plan around budget classification, so that when I look at my budget, I can filter and peel back on what's discretionary, what's legally committed, what's evergreen programs, things like that, so that every tactic that goes in has to have a budget class. And what that means realistically is when you get that April 2020 call that you've got to cut the program budget by 25%, that classification that you just did is going to show you where that 25% has to come from. Because it's not going to come from the legal commitments that you've already made. Those are set in stone. So you're going to be able to have a much clearer picture, because what CEOs that passed that edict down didn't understand is that 25% was more like 70%.
Yeah. Because
it was 25% of the part you actually could change.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's important. I mean, I remember, having to make that call as a marketing leader, right? Being said, cut your budget. And that then prompted a lot of work by a lot of people to go dig into contracts and various things. And that's not fun, right? To be able to have that visibility, it's eating up time and it's unpleasant. So I think being able to categorize things more effectively is important. But I think your other point though, too, of of saying, you know, how much each year, if you're not using a zero-based budgeting process and you're assuming that you're just going to do some of the same things you've always done, you're actually losing some room for experimentation and evolution too. So by really looking at your budget and thinking about, you know, am I saying yes to the same old events because I always have, or am I saying yes because they perform, begins to have a pretty material impact on the kinds of new things that may be more effective, to your point, in a very changed environment, than the things that we might wish we could go back to, but we probably shouldn't.
And I think I would just echo what both of you are saying too. And we don't see a ton of deals, but the ones that we do, CFOs are taking a real strong interest in a lot of the ABM type work that we're proposing with the marketer. The marketer doesn't go alone to the CFO. They're bringing us into that conversation with the CFO. And the CFO just seems to be very interested, and probably because of the zero-based budgeting, because they know it's an investment, it's change, but they have to get revenue. So they're kind of weighing a lot of different things out. So I've definitely seen an increase just in the last two or 3 weeks with non-marketing executives being really, really involved in conversations that we wouldn't normally get into. And it's hard to tell because now I'm not on the operator side. I can't tell if this is a trend or not. 3 data points may not be a trend, but it's an interesting data point, because in the past, usually the marketers, you know, taking care of everything pre-COVID, but now it's, you know, the CFO's interested and they're curious. And so far, none of them have really pushed back or been the veto authority, which is encouraging as well. So I think they see ABM as a lever to growth, of future growth, but they're still interested and curious about what that process looks like and how to get there.
Well, and I would think they're also interested in then transparency or with reporting and results, right?
Yes.
Bruce, what are you seeing in that respect? You know, what are some things you're thinking about with your customers sort of presenting information?
So a couple of things come to mind there. On the budget front, without a clear visibility into their actual spend as well as their planned spend, a lot of our customers, a lot of our prospects are leaving money on the table each quarter because they don't want to get caught in today's climate having overspent. And with a lack of visibility, they end up underspending. With a lack of visibility across the entire globe, and this one I'm talking to you, Mark, because you got global responsibility, without a coherent view across the entire globe, they are leaving money on the table in one venue that could have been used in another venue in another part of the globe, but because they can't see that, that's what's happening. In fact, we have a case study coming out with a company, I don't know if you guys know Refinitiv. They spun off of their subsidiary of the London Stock Exchange. They were part of Thomson Reuters. They spun off their $6 billion financial services infrastructure company. That's exactly the use case that we see there, and that we've got a case study coming out in a couple of weeks that highlights that. And it's all about that transparency, and not necessarily just from a reporting up standpoint, but from being able to make good decisions. You need that transparency for your own management purposes. It's how you run more efficiently, and having access to that visibility is everything. And from a marketing planning standpoint, and I end up getting in a war with the content marketers out there. Content is not king. Context is king. Everything that you do from a measurement and a analytics standpoint is about context, and that's where I'd end it with. And then I absolutely, I'd never met her, but I need to call out Karina. Next time you need to bring a swing chair for everybody. That looks amazing back there.
I know. I get a lot of call outs on that. It's there to remind me that I can take a break if I want, but I typically stay here.
I know, definitely. Karina for the win on the Zoom background. Well done. So rate my background. You'd get whatever the highest rating is.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. Bruce, before we wrap, I'll give a rapid fire question, and people can enter it into chat, or just we'll jump in and I'll start with John, and then maybe go to Bruce, and I've got one too. But what's the best thing you've read this week? Something we can pass on to the group for a little light reading over the weekend, or not light reading as the case may be, other than your awesome article on attribution.
Good question. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's by a mental health performance person, Jim Aframo, I think his name is. He studies kind of mental performance, and it's about athletes and about how they think through processes, and it applies to kind of the commercial world too, where we're kind of in this uncertain environment. But he really doesn't talk about it. I don't remember the name of the title, but I'll put it in the chat while you guys are answering the question.
Awesome. Yeah. And I see, Karina, you put one in, the next CMO Guide to Operational Marketing Excellence. That sounds great. Oh, perfect. All right. A book. Wow. That is not light reading.
I know it's self-promoting, and Betsy's on the call and she wrote it, but the case study for Refinitiv really warmed my heart. It was the best thing that I read this week. And it was really, really good. And that'll be there on our website shortly. Another week or two, we're going to get all the approvals done, but it just was such a really good story. The progress that they made, the duress that they were under, it was just really, that was my best read.
Thanks, Bruce.
So well done, Betsy. And you know what, we'll ask, since it sounds like it's not ready for publication yet and we can't share it on the call, but I think we'll all be happy to share it via the Account-Based Friday updates, Betsy and Bruce, when it is ready.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so, I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead. Who's got Jay? Here you got one.
Sorry.
Great.
Sorry. Yeah. So something that I've been really interested in is Your Life as a Strategy Circle by Dan Sullivan. And it basically gives this framework that you can apply to solving any problem where you see your vision. So where do you want to go? And this could be so open-ended, it could just really apply to anything. So you have your vision, and then you identify the obstacles between you and the vision, and then take either a decision or an action to remove each obstacle to get to your vision.
Oh, wow.
It's like a life tool. Yeah.
That sounds great. If you have a link or anything, definitely drop that.
Yeah, I'll send a link.
Yeah. All right. I'll keep an eye out if anyone wants to jump in. I'm watching the chat because I can't see everybody's images. Oh, thanks, Karina. Thanks for joining us. And mine was a piece from Harvard Business Review that one of my Winning by Design colleagues pointed me to, but it's on the best thing you're not measuring, or the most important thing you're not measuring. Instead of KPIs, it's CPIs, customer performance indicators, and basically shifting your mindset of measurement away from sort of the operational things that you need in your business to thinking about, am I delivering impact to my customers? And I'm very, very jealous of the person who wrote it in Harvard Business Review, because I think it's brilliant and a really, really cool way to sort of shift your thinking. So I'll send out a link to that one too. But it was super cool. And thanks, Joe. I see you dropped that in chat. Perfect. I'm gonna copy the chat now. So hopefully we can get all of these out to everybody. So with that, John, you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Tiffany, I see you just joined us as well. You got the nuggets right at the end. Perfect timing on your part. So thanks for joining. And we'll have this recorded as well on our YouTube channel. We do this every Friday at 11 o'clock Eastern. Next week, we'll have to figure out what the topic's going to be, Megan, but we'll make it interesting. We'll drop it in LinkedIn. Really appreciate you guys making the time, and Bruce for making the time to not only show up, but bring your posse with you too. That's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody so much. And with that, we'll wish everybody a lovely rest of your Friday and a great weekend too. We'll see you next time.